All right, Dalton. I want to start at the beginning, which is always a good place to start. Why? What prompted you to compile this book? What's your motivation?
It's been interesting working with resettled refugees, how many of them decide to go into business for themselves. And I was intrigued by the diversity of business, but also the overall success. And it just appears when you think about the tragic circumstances that led them to become refugees, that they can turn that into pure business magic. I wanted to understand what the common threads were and what were those key characteristics. And so the
Mm.
book is a collection of case studies and also recent research that's very compelling that demonstrates there are common characteristics among those who have been displaced that are either revealed or developed during displacement that help them become very successful entrepreneurs.
What do you hope to achieve with this, Dalton? Are there people perhaps skeptical about the role of refugees and their integration into American society?
Well, it's more a lack of knowledge. People generally don't understand the differentiation between refugees and other migrants. And I mean, it is a big difference because to be considered a refugee, you have to be forced from your homeland under the threat of persecution, violence, or death. You have to cross an international border into another country, and you have to be recognized by the United Nations as a refugee. And from there, you can either stay in a host nation, you can seek resettlement, or you can repatriate and go back to your home country.
Mm.
What's terribly tragic is that the average length of displacement for refugees is 23 years. Over 2 decades, they are without a home nation and they're not returning to their home country. So, in general, people don't really understand this. They don't understand the differences. And this is not by choice. They're really running for their lives. And what I would hope to do is change the narrative. And from this point, these tragic circumstances where there is, yes, this immediate call for aid, humanitarian aid, they take whatever is invested and they turn it into something far, far more. And we
Mm.
can see that not just with the businesses that are formed, but also that those that go to work for employers in other countries, they become here in the US tax paying, contributing citizens faster than any other migrant group. And I would like for the general public that's not steeped in this to understand the key differences and why these are valuable citizens and the kind of people you would like to live next door to.
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns about unrestrained immigration into this country, and as we've seen the migrants cross the southern border, is that we don't know who these people are. They're not vetted, that is for sure. They just come in and disappear. How do we know that refugees are properly vetted, especially when they come from countries such as Afghanistan, where document keeping and records is almost non-existent?
So 45 years ago, the Refugee Act of 1980, which was generally created after the fall of Saigon to absorb people from Southeast Asia, that was the beginning. That was the roots of the refugee admissions program in the United States. So over 45 years, we have learned how to properly set up case studies and case files and vet people normally when they're outside this country in other nations. Now, they are vetted by US agencies and security forces and the FBI, but they're still outside of this particular nation. And if they come from a country that may not necessarily be noted as friendly toward the US, we can take extra steps to look at them. There's also medical exams, and that's important to determine where they might be resettled in the United States. The process takes 18 to 24 months. It's
Mm.
not fast, it is thorough. And to date, we have little to no incidents of violent crime or terrorism that can be attributed to someone who has been classified as a refugee. So it is a process driven program, unlike unfettered access to this country through porous borders.
I think the book does a really good job, Dalton, of explaining how the I can't imagine how emotionally difficult it is for someone to be forced out of their homeland and then end up in a foreign country. They may not speak the language. Everything that they have known is no longer exists. And yet they are able, in many of the examples that you cite, that they can create incredibly successful businesses. But for those that are not entrepreneurial, if you like, how successful have you been in reaching potential employers to say, hey, these individuals are keen, they're hardworking and fast to learn, and that they would be considered, high ranking or high ability employees? How do you reach those employers?
We have large concentrations of refugees resettled in specific metro areas of the United States. And because they're clustered together, when employers have success, they're able to share that success with other employers who are looking for high quality employees. Now, as you said, there can be language barriers, there can be cultural obstacles, but the characteristics that make a refugee a good entrepreneur also exist for those who will be quality employees. And employers today, especially following COVID and the great resignation, they're looking for people who are resilient, who are ambitious, who have integrity. And all those characteristics fall within the realm of being a refugee. Now, part of it is probably, haven't tested this scientifically, but probably a little bit of unfounded fear that if you're a refugee and you don't, you know, integrate into society in a way that's acceptable, you might possibly be asked to leave the country. That's the last thing they want. But more than that, I believe it's a general thankfulness and an attitude of gratitude that leads them to be exemplary employees. So we have sister organizations, Amplio Recruiting, that has placed more than 20,000 refugees in the U.S. into
Wow.
employment, and that effort continues today. And every time we have success, we can share that success with other employers and we can help upscale. We can help increase educational opportunities for these refugees. But what I want you to understand, what's really important is that even though at the beginning of resettlement, when we have refugees come into this country, there is a period of aid and assistance, okay? But it's short lived. And great study between 2005 and 2019 looking at the amount of social assistance invested in refugees and then compare it over the 15-year period of what they paid in taxes at the federal, state, and local level. And by far, they paid far more in taxes than any amount of social assistance that was given to them. $125 billion more over the 15-year period. That's on par with native born Americans. Okay. These are contributors to society and to the communities where they resettle.
When you speak to groups, Rotary clubs, and so on, Dalton, what kind of reaction do you get? Because I think there are a lot of people who are perhaps prejudiced or have made up their mind about this, and then you are able to kind of give them a truthful explanation of how the program works. How's reception been as you've just talked about this refugee program?
I don't necessarily find them to be prejudiced or racist. And I believe racism is nothing more than ignorance. People
Mm,
just don't understand how much we are alike. When I'm able to lay out the situation, here what refugees are, here is what they're coming from, here is what happens when they're accepted, especially into the US, and here is why you would want these people to live next door to you. It's
mm.
pretty quiet because that's not what they're getting in terms of their sources today. So, two things I ask every group I speak to, two things I want them to do. I want them to challenge their assumptions, and I want them to interrogate their sources. We need to be asking ourselves, why do we believe what we believe? And might we be able to challenge that with new information? And then, as far as the information goes, where is it coming from? What's the motivation? Where does the money lead? Who benefits from this information being disseminated in this way? If we can accomplish those two things, I believe we will open more hearts and minds to refugees coming into the U.S.
Is there any statistical data, Dalton, on how many of the refugees ultimately go back to their homeland if they're able?
So that's hard to say, but I
Mm,
will tell you this: that less than 1% of all forcibly displaced people, that includes refugees, people that are internally displaced, they're still in their home country, but they've been forced out of their homeland, and those that have crossed over seeking asylum in the nation where they've crossed into. We have almost 130 million people that fit that
Well,
category of forcibly displaced. Okay. And the vast majority of them, they stay in a situation of displacement until they can return home. The hope
mm,
is they will go back home, wherever that is, and they'll be able to repopulate and rebuild the nation that they left, whatever the circumstances were. That's what's going on in Syria right now. You know, we've
mm,
had better than a dozen years of civil war. We have now had the fall of a regime, and we have people that have taken over the government, good or bad, we don't know, and they want to rebuild that. So there are Syrians that are in Jordan and other countries near Syria. The hope is they will go back and rebuild that nation. That is the hope for many of these nations because they need their native people to come home. So less than 1% are invited to
mm.
resettle somewhere else. And frankly, it's not enough. We could do more. There, how long should people be expected to live in a displaced situation, living either in a refugee camp, about 20% do, and the other 80% live in urban situations, many times not allowed to work, so they earn their income below the table. Very easy to be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And it puts us in a tough spot. But looking at this from a humanitarian perspective is one thing. What I want people to realize is there's an economic upside to refugees, especially those coming into the West.
You know what's interesting? There are many. You speak to taxi drivers in New York City who have come from another country looking for a better life, and they were doctors, lawyers, or whatever, and they're driving a cab in this country. Is there any skill sets that are transferable from whichever country to the United States, or at least something that they can build on to be certified and qualified in this country?
So the more professional they are, the harder it is. A lot of the professional credentials don't translate very well or transfer very easily, nor
Mm,
do some of the educational achievements. So normally, lower skilled people, it's easier for them to find work in jobs and in industries where they were working before. It's interesting that my friend Tarek Haddad, who is gosh, he's in Peace by Chocolate. So they're in Canada, but he was in medical school in Syria before his family's home and his father's business was destroyed. So he applied to 14 countries. No one wanted him because he was Syrian. Canada accepted him. He had the idea, I'm going to go to medical school.
mm.
None of it transferred. He said in Canada, the best place to have a heart attack is in a taxi cab because so many former doctors and medical
Yeah.
students drive taxi cabs there. So that is a big issue. Also, when someone is forced to leave, it's normally a quick decision. I mean,
Mm.
fast. They've got to go. So a lot of the documentation they would have to prove their abilities, their scholarship left behind. No way to verify that.
Administrations come and go, Dalton. We have a new administration now. Are you concerned that there's not going to be the same level of support, or are you hopeful that there'll be more support when it comes to helping refugees integrate into US society?
So we need to remove the politics from this discussion. That's one thing we need to do. And we can all support the idea of security for the people that live within our boundaries, within our borders. And I'm confident during this 90-day hiatus, as the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security examine the refugee admissions program, that it will be restarted and we will find it to be more successful. I am very hopeful. I know there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of concern because we're in an unknown period. But I can tell you, history proves this to be an extraordinarily safe and successful program for all people involved, for all stakeholders.
And Dalton, have you seen, you've been involved in this for quite some time, have you seen it grow? Have you seen the progress that you would like to see?
I have not, and I will tell you, it's because the problem is outpacing those of us who want to be involved and make a difference. We've seen in the last decade the number of forcibly displaced people double, and that's because of natural disasters and failed countries, failed states. Those two are the main reasons. And so the countries that are in a position to assist and accept refugees to resettle, we're not moving fast enough. But I also understand this takes time. And we need to be thinking about mutual benefit. It's not just for the benefit of the resettled refugee, but it's to the benefit of what would be their new homeland. And we need to be thinking about it in those terms. I don't mean always what's in it for me, but it's what's in it for us. And from this research and other research that I've been fortunate to take part in, I can say that in every situation where refugees have gone to a new homeland, every one that I'm familiar with, there is great benefit to the people that are in the neighborhood where they moved to and to the refugees themselves.
How does the United States stack up with other countries around the world, Dalton, when it comes to taking in refugees? Are we the leader, or are we behind some other countries?
Historically, we have been the leader. The United Nations has cited the U.S. as the gold standard, and we have taken in more refugees than any nation in the world. In the last 7 years, we have seen fewer. But again, it does change. That's not entirely unusual. If you look at trends from 1980 all the way to 2025, it ebbs and flows for many different reasons. However, we've taken in a total of just over 3 million refugees in 45 years. And remember, I said there are 130 million displaced
Yeah.
people right now. So we're the leader, and it's a pinprick.
Yeah, that's very sobering. And I guess finally, Dalton, you've written the book, you speak to groups. What other ways are you trying to get the word out and let people know that this is a program that has that benefits everybody?
Yeah, it, the enormity of the problem makes anything I might suggest seem like,
Mm,
well, that's not a big help. We have to focus on the private sector. This has largely been the expectation. This is for government, non-governmental organizations, and humanitarian aid organizations. But the problem is huge, and so we have to. I mean, we have to get the private sector involved. We have to get
yeah.
businesses and banking and all of those people involved in saying it's our problem too. It's our problem to solve. And how can we make it better for all stakeholders? So what I hope to do through organizations and affiliations I've had as an entrepreneur, especially in finance and technology, I hope to have opportunities to motivate these people to look for the answers and want to become part of the solution. So that's one. But we're also partnering with other organizations like Resilient People, training people in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya who are
Mm.
displaced how to work online with business process outsourcing. So if someone's going to be there over 2 decades, we have to look beyond resettlement. We have to think about helping people where they are. So we're testing how that's going to work, and we hope we have a model that we can share with other people. But again, a lot of research, a lot of new information, trying to disseminate it a number of different ways, and trying to get the business sector involved, which largely has been absent from this.
Well, good luck with the book, and we look forward to an update on your efforts.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate your time.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.